More than 54 years ago, at the height of the Cold War, the United States closed its embassy in Havana. Today, I can announce that the United States has agreed to formally reestablish diplomatic relations with the Republic of Cuba and reopen embassies in our respective countries.
Plenty of Americans would love to believe that the mere action of opening an American embassy in Cuba will change that nation into a bastion of democracy and show the Castro dictatorship how little power they have in the free world. Others will point to a dedicated communist ideal, and the Obama administration just feeding the money and attention Cuba desires with no intent of becoming a freer nation. Let's get into this. Our guest is Professor of Government at American University and co-author of Back Channel to Cuba. Let's welcome Professor William LeoGrande back to the Hardline. Professor, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be back with you.
Professor, let's talk about what the president said. This is what change looks like, is the big line that he's pointing about these embassies opening. But in your opinion, is it good change?
Well, I think so. I think it will do a couple of things. It will allow U.S. diplomats on the island greater access to the Cuban government, which has been very restricted because they weren't a full embassy. But more importantly, it will now allow them greater access to ordinary Cubans from all strata of society. Part of the agreement that was negotiated over the last 6 months was to once again allow U.S. diplomats and Cuban diplomats to travel all over the host country and talk to people.
Isn't that what we miss a lot of times when there's the politics, the rhetoric, the back and forth about this is we don't really have honest boots on the ground. This will put people there who can start to work within Cuba, look at it, and bring us back an actual idea of what's going on. Granted, the Cuban government won't be crystal clear and transparent, but we at least will have eyes on the country and the people.
Well, that's exactly right. U.S. diplomats who are there now in the interest section are only able to travel around metropolitan Havana. And as you can imagine, Havana is really different from the rest of Cuba. So for them to be able to now get out into the small towns, get out onto the farms and talk to people there, see what conditions are like in the sort of far reaches of the country is going to really paint a much fuller picture of Cuban society for us.
But won't the Cuban government do everything they can to make sure that whatever our people in Havana see will be exactly what they want them to see and not what reality is?
Well, I think it's hard for them to do that, actually. When diplomats have the freedom to travel without getting prior permission to do that, they typically are able to talk to a wide variety of people. Now, it of course depends upon the willingness of Cubans out there in the smaller cities and towns to be willing to talk to U.S. diplomats. But I think our experience before 2003, when the travel restrictions were imposed, was that people were willing to talk.
We have a lot of presidential candidates talking now as well, and certainly everybody is weighing in. In your professional opinion then, having been in the country and knowing it, a lot of the Republicans are speaking out against this and calling it really a bad deal. As a matter of fact, Scott Walker says the president is foolishly rewarding Cuban leaders. If you were to counsel them, would you tell them that with the Hispanic vote so difficult at this time right now, and in light of what Donald Trump has said and so many others, that maybe they need to be a little more prudent in what they say?
Well, I think two things. First is I think that these moves by the president serve the national interest of the United States. And for any presidential candidate, they ought to put that ahead of partisan politics. The second thing is, though, if we look at partisan politics, because as you said, there's always politics involved, public opinion in the United States, even in the Cuban American community, has been very supportive of re-engaging with Cuba. So this is going to be an issue among Republican candidates as they go after the conservative Cuban American vote for the Florida primary. But when it comes to the general election in this country, there's not many voters who are going to decide how to vote based on a candidate's policy toward Cuba.
Professor, I have 1 minute left, and a statement from the Cuban government wants, of course, an end to the U.S. embargo, the return of the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo, and a halt to U.S. radio and TV broadcasts aimed at the island. Do you see any of those things happening anytime soon?
No, I don't see any of those things happening anytime soon. The Obama administration has said it's not willing to discuss the democracy programs. It's not willing to discuss the return of Guantanamo. And although the president has called for lifting the embargo, that requires a vote of Congress. And certainly with Republican majorities in both the House and Senate, with the presidential campaign just gearing up, they're not going to do anything on the Hill that's going to make Obama's Cuba policy look like a success. So lifting the embargo is really going to be an issue for 2017.
And let's put it very succinctly here. Raul Castro is looking, and he's also looking at money. So there's one way or another that when things start to normalize, there's going to be a lot of money coming into Cuba. And trust me, that's what he's thinking of as well. Want to remind everybody once again, the book is fascinating. Back Channel to Cuba. So much that you know and so much that you don't know as well. Professor William LeoGrande, thank you so much for joining us, sir. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
My pleasure.
All right, take care. Breaking back here on the Hardline. Stock markets around the world trembling at the news from Greece. But for the moment, let's zero in on Washington, D.C. and what our fearless leaders are doing to ensure what happened there does not impact us. It's all about the money. It's all about what happens here on the fastest 60 minutes in news, the Hardline.